So where do you find yourself in this story? I see some of myself at different times in my life with each follower of Jesus. There are times when I'm so eager to grab at the most immediate answer, barely stopping to pray or weep. I get in and I get out. This doesn't mean that we aren't committed to Jesus, but rather that we aren't always willing to take the time to reflect and consider what we've just seen or experienced. For example, the disciples didn't understand the scriptures concerning Jesus' resurrection because they had yet taken the time to reflect on all that Jesus had taught them. It's surely understandable since they were still grieving the death of Jesus. But how often do we dip our toes into the story of Jesus simply now and again and see a bit that excites us, leads us to believe a bit, but then leave again before Jesus has been fully revealed in our lives? Then there are other times when I weep, just like Mary Magdalene. I weep, and often I'm not even crying over the things that are probably most important. Mary Magdalene is crying bitterly here because she believes that Jesus' body has been taken, when in fact he is risen and is standing right beside her. I want to emphasize that when you see tears flowing from someone's face, when you have tears streaming down your cheeks, it's a reminder that struggles and sorrows are a part of life, no matter your age, no matter your financial status, no matter how popular or unpopular you are. Some think that it's wrong for children of God to be shedding tears during difficult times of their life. And they should try not to shed tears. They should try to be strong during the times of trouble that they're facing. And we've sometimes been told that tears, they're a sign of weakness. We've been told that it's a sign of lack of courage. Tears are something that are familiar to all of us. Tears are familiar to the infant as well as the oldest person living at this very moment. Think about it. It's tears and crying that are the first signs of life of a newborn child. From infancy to old age, the record of every person's life is written in the letters of tears. Now, I could speak today on a multitude of subjects with which only a few people might be familiar. But when I speak of tears, every one of us can immediately recall the experiences of our own life. The tears of joy, the tears of anger, the tears of worry, and the tears of sorrow that have rolled down our cheeks. Tears have much to do with our souls. Why are you weeping? Mary Magdalene is asked. It's a question that gets asked by the angels in the tomb and once by Jesus himself. Mary, why are you crying? Don't you know it's Easter Sunday? Put yourself in her sandals. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Mary Magdalene was one of the group of women who followed Jesus throughout his ministry. And these women themselves had been cured by Jesus of various ailments. We're told that for her part, Mary Magdalene had 7 demons thrown out of her. Mary had gotten her life back because of Jesus. I imagine out of gratitude, she wanted to see Jesus continue to flourish so others could know the joy and the wholeness that she felt. Mary Magdalene's story throughout history doesn't actually get a whole lot of attention. And yet, while most of the disciples had abandoned Jesus out of fear, it's Mary, along with a few other women, who stayed with Jesus all the way through the crucifixion. So why is Mary crying? Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. There are lots of reasons to cry that morning. Jesus had literally saved Mary Magdalene from the grip of evil. She had left her broken life behind to follow him as much as a woman could in that male-dominated, rather chauvinistic culture that didn't permit women to be taught by a rabbi and who didn't count a woman's testimony as even valid in a court of law. Why was she crying? Because Jesus, her Savior, her teacher, her friend, was brought up on false charges and brutally executed right before her very eyes. But it was more than losing someone important to her. She had also lost her hope. Have you ever known that feeling of losing hope? It looked like Jesus was going to be the one who would at last usher in God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. God was going to do that through Jesus. Just what God has always promised to do, to bring good news to the poor and forgiveness of sins. But all those hopes came crashing down on Friday on a cross when Jesus died. Can you imagine how disorienting that must have been? Life following Jesus was supposed to be better than this. And now life was suddenly and drastically not going as it was planned. Maybe you can imagine how disorienting that loss must have been because you've been there yourself. Have you ever had a time in your life that you left disoriented, confused, unsure of the way forward? Maybe that it's even what brought you here today. Maybe it's the death of a dream, the death of a child, a spouse, a parent, a marriage, a hope. You had your own ideas of the way things were supposed to be, but your life has suddenly plunged into darkness. And there were forces that were outside of Mary's control. There were the religious leaders who seemed to do the opposite of what they were supposed to do. There was the Roman government with sovereign authority to execute. We all know what it's like to be up against forces outside of our control. And at the same time, Mary Magdalene must have been plagued by the questions we all face when we're grieving. Am I somehow at fault for this? Could I have done more? God, how could you let this happen? I guess you're not who I thought you were, God. I get it, Mary. If you and I are honest with ourselves, we probably get it too. It's not rocket science. Mary, we get why you're crying. And her tears, they're important, and they're holy, and they're sacred to God. Why are you crying? It's a holy question, and our answers matter to God. Did you ever feel like that? Did you ever feel like when it rains, it pours? It seems like it's never just one thing that comes at you, is it? It wasn't enough that Jesus was dead to add insult to injury. Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb to find the stone rolled away. And in her grief, she jumps to the most likely answer. Her Lord's body has been taken away by grave robbers. Now, from our perspective, we often talk about the empty tomb as good news. But at this point in the story, it's clear that for Mary Magdalene, the empty tomb isn't good news at all. It's the worst news. It's like pouring salt into the wound, still raw from the crucifixion. The brutal execution of Jesus. In her horror and raw grief, Mary runs to tell Peter and another disciple. And she says to them, "They've taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." They run back to the tomb and look in, and when they do, they see something very unexpected. There, Jesus' grave clothes were still in the tomb, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head was all nicely and neatly folded up. Suddenly, the story of Jesus' body being stolen is even more confusing. What grave robber is going to take the time in the middle of exhuming and stealing a body to neatly fold the laundry, only to have to carry out an uncovered body? It doesn't make sense. It says that when the other disciple looked in the tomb, he saw and believed. Well, perhaps he remembered what Jesus had told him at the Last Supper. If you love me, you would rejoice that I'm going off to the Father, because the Father is greater than I. And maybe he remembered Jesus saying that he told them this beforehand so that they would believe after it happened. Okay, so maybe that's it. Jesus isn't there because he's gone to be with his Father in heaven, just like he said. But it says Mary stood outside the tomb weeping. Doesn't seem like Mary was in on those conversations. The Jesus from before is gone, and all she's got left is to stare at the empty tomb that stands there like a monument to her grief and shattered hopes. And maybe today you feel like you're standing right next to Mary, mourning some loss in your life. And the empty tomb for you, as it was for Mary, doesn't seem like such great news. It's simply a pointer to a world that provides more pain than comfort and more questions than answers. Why are you crying? Have you lost your hope? Mary is mourning the loss of her old faith, the loss of the way things used to be, loss of her dreams for the future. But she doesn't need her old faith. She needs a faith that has endured the reality of violence and death. A faith only to meet Jesus again, as if it's for the first time. She needs a resurrection faith, a faith of hope. Mary stands at the entrance to the tomb, controlled by her deep grief. Mary can keep looking in the tomb all she wants, looking for the Jesus she used to know, the familiar Jesus, the Jesus who stayed where you put him, dead Jesus. Except Jesus isn't where they put him, and he's not dead. He's not in the tomb. Staring into the tomb, she sees the two angels who ask her the question, "Why are you weeping?" By this point, she's probably so numb to the reality that the presence of angels doesn't even seem to startle her. And so she just rehashes the answer that she's been giving everyone who asks. They've taken away the Lord, and I don't know where they've put him. Probably pleading for answers. And then something amazing happens. As soon as she has said this, she turned around and she sees Jesus standing there. Jesus standing behind Mary, waiting for her. Mary can't stop herself because her pain is so deep. She's grieving. The pain is too complicated. But she can decide to stop orienting her life toward the tomb. She can turn from searching for the faith she had before. She can turn away from her regrets over the past, what should have been, what could have been. She can turn away from the tomb and see what she's been missing. I wonder if Mary felt Jesus' eyes on her. Because when she turned, Jesus was right there, just waiting. Just letting her take that first step towards him at her own time. Her eyes off the past, off the empty tomb, and now consider what God's future might be. She turns and she sees Jesus standing there, but she doesn't know it's Jesus. She'd just seen him a few days earlier. Why doesn't she recognize him? Yes, she's turned from the tomb, but she'll continue to be confused until she finds that resurrection faith. She needs to turn inwardly from her boxed-in view of Jesus. She needs to seek Jesus in a new, fresh way. The Jesus she doesn't recognize asked her the same question the angels asked her. Why are you crying? But he adds something new. Who are you looking for? Mary doesn't recognize Jesus still. But having turned from the tomb, she's open to some new possibilities. And I can imagine her thinking, maybe this is the gardener, okay? Think, Mary, think. Maybe Jesus' body wasn't stolen after all. Maybe the gardener just moved him. And she says, "Sir, if you've carried him away, please tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." And she's finally ready. She's turned from the tomb. She's begun to seek Jesus in a new, fresh way. And at last, she's ready to meet Jesus again. And all Mary has to do is hear Jesus say her name. Watch what happens next. He calls her by name, and then he tells her to go tell the disciples that Jesus is going up to the Father. Only moments ago, Mary Magdalene had no future. She was hopeless. But now she's seen that Jesus is alive. And all the people in the world that Jesus could have appeared to first, he comes to Mary. He doesn't appear to Peter, the leader of the disciples. He doesn't appear to the one who in the Gospel of John is called the disciple that Jesus loved. He doesn't appear to the Roman emperor, to the religious leadership. He appears to Mary Magdalene, a woman whose testimony supposedly didn't count. Think about Jesus appearing to Mary Magdalene as the first piece of evidence. If you're trying to fabricate a story about how your leader had been raised from the dead, certainly you would choose someone reputable to be your first witness, not a woman. But Jesus doesn't choose the reputable first. He chooses the left out, the broken, the hopeless, the mourning. And Mary Magdalene becomes the first to see and to testify to the risen Jesus. She has seen the Lord. The empty tomb is no longer bad news. Even the crucifixion with all its horror becomes good news because of the resurrection. Jesus didn't die in vain. The world did its worst, but God's power was far greater. Christ is risen. God is doing a new surprising thing, just like God always said he would do. So why are you crying? Who are you looking for today? Are you stuck staring at the tomb, the monument to a failed past, a faith that's gone? Life is seasons of good and bad, joy and pain. And the promise of Easter is that God is there for us, and God is with us through it all. In the midst of our struggles, sadness, and disappointments, the good news today is that the God we worship is a crucified and risen God, which is to say we worship a God that is not unfamiliar with darkness, a God who comes close to those who mourn, a God who comes close to those who stands outside of tombs, a God who is not far off, but who is as close as the gasp for air in our deepest sobs of sadness. Maybe it's time to turn around. Are you sensing that Jesus is right there? That feeling isn't something just emerging from your emotions. It's Jesus' eyes on you. He's right here, waiting for you to choose to turn from the broken past and seek him in a new way. Let your heart listen to Jesus, asking you, why are you crying? A holy question, an invitation into a new and deeper faith. Listen, Jesus is calling your name in a way that's simultaneously familiar and strangely new. He wants you, even you, to join in Mary's testimony. I have seen the Lord, and he wants you, and he wants me, and he wants all of us to have hope for our future. Amen.